All right. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the Startup Summit. This talk was a little open. It was sort of like, hey, you've done startups before. You had the full cycle startup journey with Convoy, and you've also worked in some big companies. And so when I thought about what to talk about, I thought about kind of that journey and things I learned along the way. You know, assuming there's a lot of people in here that are looking to build a startup, looking to help and advise people that are building startups. Maybe have joined a startup in a leadership role and are thinking about how do I actually take on this responsibility when I have much more scope than I had before. And so I'm actually going to go through a series of things that I learned and observed in building Convoy and also some of the other roles I've had related to culture and then related to operations. And at the end, we'll just open it up for questions and we can jump into any topics you guys want. All right, so here's my background. I think it's useful to know what I'm saying and where it's coming from, so you have the context of how to kind of think about it. So I've been at a bunch of big companies. I kind of started my technology career. First job was a product manager at Microsoft. I went to Wavy, which was an AI startup in Seattle back in sort of the machine learning, big data days. I thought it was funny because I remember it was like the worst startup name because you couldn't spell it. It didn't mean anything, and you couldn't pronounce it either. But we just went with it. So Wavy was bought by Google's machine intelligence team, so I joined that group for a little while. Then I ended up moving to Amazon, and I worked in a bunch of different things there, kind of managed several different product teams, did a bunch of work in AI there as well. So Wavy was an AI startup, I should say, and that's why Google's machine intelligence team bought it. And when I was at Amazon, I had this notion that the supply chain is winning. I remember writing that down. I had a bunch of other observations, but I wanted to go explore a supply chain business, and I actually had a lot of different ideas. Went in the field, I've talked about this, I went to truck stops, walked into lots of warehouses, called everybody I knew in the trucking industry. I'd grown up with a lot of people that became kind of truck drivers, and realized there was a huge opportunity to do trucking and build a whole new business around that. So I went and tackled that. That had, like I said, a full life cycle. We had some incredible highs, we had a bunch of challenging times at Convoy as well, and ultimately went to Flexport as part of that. And then I had a bunch of thoughts around the future of software. And I remember thinking at Convoy, I didn't like the fact that my employee experience using all these applications was like 32 tabs in the browser, every application that we use. So outside of the core software we built, like many startups, we just spun the business up by signing up for over-the-counter SaaS applications, recruiting, HR, finance, et cetera. And so employees would have these applications they could use, but the workflows were always siloed in the application. The data was siloed. You had to learn a new UX, a new vocabulary for every application. It was a challenge. So I thought, what is the future of work? I wrote a paper called SaaS Inversion, the one called Meta Agent Platforms in 24 around. I thought the future was instead of going to all these applications, they would come to you. You could generatively build the application needed in front of you. Your agent or your personal AI assistant would go get work done for you, bring things back to you, et cetera. This would be the future of work, so you could stay in flow state. So anyway, I wrote these papers down, started pitching companies on these ideas, and ended up at Microsoft working on this problem. So that is my background, so you guys know where I'm coming from when I say all these other things. It gives you some context. But now I'm going to jump into kind of a different set of things around what I learned in building a company. So I'll start out by talking about culture, which I think is extremely important in a startup. And this quote really resonated with me. And I say it's a quote. It's been said by I think 20 different people, and I think it's been regurgitated many times, so I'm not sure who actually was the original Reed Hastings or Ben Horowitz. I've seen it cited too. But the idea is your company's going to have a culture. That will happen. The question is, are you involved in influencing what that is and helping to shape it around something you think aligns with your mission and the people you want at the company? So being deliberate. That is the first lesson that I learned. It's really important to think about deliberate culture. So there's lots of ways to create culture. There's many elements of culture. One of the things we did at Convoy was we built a set of leadership principles or Convoy values. And I remember Amazon had a set of leadership principles. And when I was at Amazon, it was the first time I'd worked in a company where everyone talked about them and used them all the time. I'd never been in a place like that where everybody just was actively using these leadership principles and they were actually real. And I had a really fortunate experience. I got to talk to Jeff Bezos about all these questions. He was one of our angel investors. And I remember asking why he and how he came up with the leadership principles. And he said that it was interesting. He started writing stuff down when he first created the company, and then he realized he didn't quite know what he was doing. So he waited like a year to see what was working and what wasn't working and just kind of get a feel for how things were going. And then he went back and said, okay, let me codify, write down the things that I really want to keep. Like, what do I want us to be now that I kind of know what's helping us work? So we took a similar approach. And these are examples of some of the values that we wrote down. Always have a sense of urgency, bring out the best in others, things that we wanted to be like an operating playbook for how employees would work and how we would recruit people and how we would reward people within the company. So I'm going to share a few examples of what these meant to us. So know why. This was a really important one because I didn't want a culture where people did stuff because Dan said so. I've been in those environments. I've been told to do something because somebody said so, and it's very demotivating. It also doesn't allow you to act independently with ownership. And so if you think about this know why concept, which do you want? Like, are you doing a job or are you part of a storyline? Do you feel indifferent about the company you're part of, or do you feel emotionally invested in the success of this company? Are you showing up to execute on a plan somebody gave you, or are you showing up to figure out how to solve a problem that exists? Do you have the context that allows you to act like an owner? If you don't know why you're doing something and really think about the context and get that information, if the company doesn't feel like it needs to give you that, you're not going to feel like you're part of this thing. So I think that's really important in a startup. Next is innovate deliberately. And let me go back real quick. So innovate, okay. I think it's okay to copy sometimes, but a lot of times it feels uncomfortable to copy. You're going to build many things in your startup. If you're building software or you're building a technology, some of the things you're going to invest your time and energy in are very, very important for whether or not you win. They are the critical distinguishing factors of your business that differentiate you and give you the chance to win. Pretty much everything else doesn't matter as much. So I wanted our team to not spend time on things that didn't matter a lot. And here's a perfect example. This is actually the example that we went through. We were creating a trucking company, and so people were going to rate facilities, like rate a warehouse, what their experience was driving up to this warehouse. And so we wanted to create a rating system for every facility inside of the app that the truck drivers used. And at this time, Amazon had come out with a 5-star rating system, and everybody knew what a 1-star rating was and a 5-star rating. But I remember our team started debating, do we want to do a 5-star system or do we want to do a 1 through 5 system? And then the people on the 1 through 5 camp were like, well, if we do 1 through 5, like we have to figure out if 1 is good or if 5 is good, and maybe we can use colors or put like a smiley face under 1 or all this other stuff. And I was like, guys, what are we doing? Like, this is not going to make a difference for whether or not we win. Let's just pick the one everybody already knows. Let's use the stars. So we went with stars. But I thought it was just a really good lesson. I created a value out of it. I'm like, I don't want us to waste time on stuff that's not going to matter. Because you want to feel unique, but you really, really have to feel unique in where it matters and give it up elsewhere. That was a learning I had. Last one, love problems, not solutions. Kind of goes back to this ratings example, actually. So the idea is, and I'll share kind of the concept of what this value is. But back in 1995, when Amazon's getting going, they create 5-star ratings for products. You can rate products and review them. Really important, because if you can remember before online shopping, it was weird to start buying things online when you couldn't talk to a sales rep and you couldn't like touch it and feel it and read the packaging to know what you're buying. So how do you know this is good? Well, somebody else can rate it as good, and so you know, or they can rate it as bad, so you avoid it. So Amazon created a team called the Ratings and Reviews team. Now, I joined in 2013. Pinterest had come along, social curation, video reviews. Those weren't part of the experience for how to discover products on Amazon still. We created this thing called Ask a Question, Get an Answer on Amazon. That was an innovation as well. And I remember the Ratings and Reviews team, not to pick on that team, but they were against this at first because it's not ratings and reviews. And what I realized was the mistake the company made was they called the team the Ratings and Reviews team. So everyone who ever joined that team thought, my job is to make more ratings on, more ratings and reviews on more devices in more countries and grow the ratings and reviews business. They should have called it the Customer Confidence team or the Buying Confidence team, because then everyone they hired would have shown up and thought, oh, my job is to help customers have confidence buying something. Maybe we should do social creation. Maybe we should do something else. And it would have freed them to feel like they could go in all sorts of directions to solve the problem, because their job was about solving a problem, not executing somebody else's plan, which is ratings and reviews. That distinction is really important in a startup, because you need your employees to feel like they're part of the problem. So name what they're doing after the problem. Give them the freedom to pursue it. All right, so a couple of things after these like cultural values that I thought were really critical that I learned. Storytelling. It doesn't matter if it's a movie or you're trying to convince your kids of something, or you want your, your customers to lean into you. Everybody relates to a story. You want to be part of something. You want to be part of an interesting story. So you have to think about, for what I'm doing, what's the context in the world? What is the opportunity that's just right there in front of us? What's the tension point as to why we can't get that opportunity? What is holding the world back from it? And how are we going to unlock it for everyone so it makes everything better? Like, that is this great storyline that's tested. Use it for your startup. But remember, when you talk to customers, when you talk to employees, when you talk to investors, you're storytelling, and you really need to think of it that way versus just like sharing facts with them, for example. So that's one thing that I took to heart. I had to go make truck driving interesting for awesome people. I think truck driving is great, but a lot of people I had to convince, like, why would you join a truck driving company or trucking company? Like, there's a story. Why would my customer, who's never worked with a technology company, because they're shipping freight, want to take a bet? Well, because they want to be part of a story that's interesting. So we just lean into this. The next thing, clarify intentions. As a leader of a startup, and this is the same thing in a large company, when you hire another leader onto your team, you really need them to trust you. But again, I'm gonna emphasize things in startups. These things are all amplified because there's so much on the line. Things are usually happening quickly, and that trust is so important. So one thing I found as a leader, when I would hire somebody to come join Convoy and they'd report to me, I would send them a note that says, hey, here's what I expect from you as it, like the what I want you to role model from a values perspective, from a work perspective. But I'm also going to write just as much about what you can expect from me. Here's how I'm going to show up for you. Here's what your expectations for me, the standard I want to hold to myself is this, or I want to hold myself to is this. And if I'm not, I want you to call me on it. So this bi-directional upfront conversation where you sit down over a meal and just talk through it, I found to be a really good way to build trust quickly in a situation where you have to do that, which is this startup and you're getting someone to bet on you. Another thing is around recruiting and talent. And it's interesting because both startups and large companies want people who want to show up every day, knock down walls, and make it happen. Like that attitude of I am here to make this, I'm going to bring this to life, I'm going to will this into existence, and I'm going to make this thing successful. You need that at every company. The distinction, though, is that at a bigger company, you also need people who are going to come in and operate the things that are kind of already there, innovate them, but there's just multiple types of roles, and the kind of like requirements change a little bit. And it's hard to have two cultures. It's hard to have two compensation structures that manage the risk reward. So at a startup, you have this advantage of this pure play where you have kind of one culture, one risk reward trade-off, and you can really focus on the type of person you need who's going to be that first, that knock down the walls. You need to have 80% of your employees with that mindset. So I think when I thought about recruiting from the very beginning, I would create a filter up down the whole path of how I wrote to someone, how I talked to them in the first meeting, making sure they're the one that followed up with me, all these things. Be really deliberate. So at the end of that funnel, you only have people that really want to be there and they want to be part of this because you don't, like if you're convincing somebody too hard, you're working too hard to convince somebody to join, that's probably not the right sign for a startup. They will have to want to be there. Just remember that. I think that's really critical. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears now from some of the cultural topics I thought were useful learnings to some things that are more operational. First one is people don't read the instructions. And it's funny. So one thing, we did at Convoy is we built a system where we had a truck job that was happening over multiple days, let's say, or over, 36 hours. And we had multiple shifts of people providing support. And instead of so we wanted to make that group more flexible so they could adapt to different customers that have more shipments this day, other customers more shipments that day, so a fungible workforce. But it required people to write down their notes of what was happening, and then the next person who picked up that job had to read the notes. And they just didn't do that. Like, as much as we tried, just the human nature of, I got this, I'll figure it out, and they would just go back and do it again, and it would piss off the customer. Like, why are you doing this again? And we just realized, and it was funny, I had this, so Henry Kravis, who's like the founder of KKR, this incredible investor, was one of our investors, and one of my mentors as I was building it. And I remember calling him, I'm like, I am struggling here. This is just not working. And his answer was like, Dan, I'm like 80, I don't know, I think he's like 80 years old. He's like, I've been doing this a long time. I'm in a lot of companies. No one reads stuff. Like, stop building a system that assumes people are going to read. So I know it sounds really basic, and maybe I'm wrong, but like, I've just found when we build for our customers too, they don't even read what's on the page in front of them. My daughter doesn't read what's on the page in front of her. She's like, she just looks for the button to click. It's sort of this notion of, and it's even worse with AI, like You have to think about designing your system in a way that does not require people to stop and read a bunch of information written by somebody else. So I found that not just be like a product thing, it's truly an operations thing within your company. That like you have to design your system that way. Another one, which I thought was really interesting, maybe counterintuitive, you want to hire the best people, but you also need to remember that every time you hire somebody, it was a failure to operate more efficiently and to innovate without having to bring a new person on. Like you actually weren't able to do it without them, so you had to go hire someone. This is increasingly important with AI as well. Like, could I not have done this in a different way? Did I need to hire someone? And I think this mindset is really important. Now, I'll give an exaggerated example. The first time I heard somebody say this to me, they actually said, a founder came to me, a founder CEO of a big company. They had raised billions of dollars from SoftBank. They had hired up way too fast. And I remember I was at an event with them in California, and they come to me and they were like, hey, I've been struggling with this. We're just hiring so fast. He's like, I'm really trying to teach my team that every time we hire, it's a failure. I'm like, that's extreme. What do you mean? I thought we're supposed to hire good people. He's like, no, people will always want to hire good people. How do I teach them that actually the solution is not to hire? You have to challenge yourself to not hire somebody. And this is before generative AI. But it really stuck with me. I was like, oh, that's really kind of powerful. Like, you have the ability to hire anybody, and you're feeling like you're failing because you're having to hire so many people. Like, that's an interesting thing to think about. And now as we see AI come about, it's even more pronounced. Like, hire great people, but always consider it to be the thing that you wish you didn't have to do. You wish you could have gotten it done without hiring that person. That's a good mental model, and it will mean you grow more efficiently. This one's also really interesting. So one thing I learned at Convoy, we were an operational company. I'm sure a lot of people out here, and if you're doing a B2B business in particular, there's some level of operations and customer service. So does my customer feel taken care of? Am I serving their needs? Am I serving them? And then am I running my operations super efficiently? It's easier than you think, at least for me, it was easy to conflate those things. I would have a process that would serve a customer, and I would optimize maybe for the efficiency of that process. And I'd put a person in that role that was really good at like optimizing the numbers and the efficiency, but would forget about the actual like customer experience. Or I'd bring somebody in who was like in love with the customer experience, but didn't know how to do the math to like make it better over time. And finding somebody who could do both was really hard. And so this is an example. I wrote this down because this is kind of a real thing. Like, which one do you think is better? Let's say 90% of the time you deliver really well for your customer. So 10% of the time you fail. But when you fail, the customer feels great. They feel like you supported them. You were there, that you called them, that they felt like seen. Now let's say you only fail 2% of the time, which is 1/5. It's amazing. Like you're incredibly efficient and you're running this thing really well. But when you fail those 2% of the time, the customer feels it. Like, which one do you think is better? I'm curious. Raise your hand if you think A is better. Raise your hand if you think B is better. Okay. So I think it does depend on the business. So a few people raise their hand for B. There are certain circumstances where B is better, especially in some consumer scenarios. In our experience in trucking, A was always better. Like, and I remember thinking about it. It was interesting because we were optimizing more for like extremely high performance. And when things would go wrong, we would like solve it, but it wasn't like always as high as the priority of somebody whose entire business was based on the relationship. And we realized the customer that was buying from us and like building that relationship with us doesn't notice the 90% as much. They notice when things go wrong. If you think about, let's say a relationship that you have with your doctor. Let's say you go see your doctor. Let's say you see your doctor every month, and your doctor gives you lots of great advice, and they give you the right vitamins, and they tell you the right exercise regimen and the right mental thing to do. Whatever you're doing, and you're really healthy. Like, they do a great job. You're healthy for 10,000 days. And then you get really sick. And when you're really sick, they do a good job taking care of you. They're not empathetic. They don't really ask you that questions. They don't really understand. You're going to think that's a terrible doctor. Because the one time that you actually had a problem, they weren't great at it. But even if they prevented it for 10,000 days. So I think that's just the psychology of how it works. And I think it's really important because when you're working with business customers, just remember that. Like, especially when we're building things with AI and we're building things with, I'll give an example. I spent some time this week with a top 5 trucking company in the US. I don't do that very often, but they needed me to come help them think about AI because they've been working on it. They've been trying these AI solutions that sound like a human, providing customer service calls, providing some level of like inbound customer support. And they found that when they turned it on to work with their truck drivers, even though it sounded good and it was able to handle all the issues, like it handled all the problems, the volume of calls from truck drivers went down by 60%, which actually wasn't a good thing. It meant the truck driver was just saying, I don't want to talk to you, so I'm just going to figure it out, because they're pretty independent. There's like, I'll go figure it out. I'll go talk to some other people and try to figure it out. I don't want to call in. They just stopped calling in because they didn't like the experience. And it was kind of interesting because, again, technically it worked. The thing was giving them the right answers. It was working. It's just for whatever reason, they hadn't cracked this issue with these particular audience. And like they had to think about the service versus like the efficiency. Okay. And then in the last one, I think this is the last one I was going to talk about. We are all coached to be using data. Like be data driven. Derive insights from data. Test things, A/B test. It's really important. Like use data to determine what you're going to do. And I strongly believe that. And I've done a million things that align with that over my career. But what I've also found is when something's wrong or there's confusion and you're trying to talk through it with your team or your customer or internally you're trying to figure out what to do, get out of the high-level jargon and data. Get into specific examples. Like, what is the actual example? We're going to walk through it end to end. And we're going to sit, and we're just going to, and every time someone's trying to explain something, be like, no, explain it as a really clear, concrete example, using the actual words that we use in our product, that our customers use, no buzzwords. And I find that's the fastest way to clarify something. And this is true at startups, it's true at Microsoft for sure, anywhere. Like getting into that detail really clarifies things fast. And I'm just emphasizing this because I think, especially with AI, like we can step back more and like let these systems run, but we need to be really aware of the actual detailed examples that are operating our system and use those when we talk about things. And again, I found this, maybe these were all obvious for everybody else, by the way. These are just things that I kind of like weren't always obvious for me, or that I maybe leaned the wrong way at different times in my journey of building startups and working in companies. Okay, so thank you for hearing kind of this journey that I've been on and these learnings I've had. And now I'd love to be able to answer any questions anybody might have. Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Hey, Dan. Is it working? Yeah, okay. Thanks for the talk. Quick question for you. When did you in Convoy decide to have that conversation to set down a culture? Did you actually go through a process? How did you communicate it? How did you come up with it? Because as an early stage founder, you're kind of, is it too early? When should I do it? How many people should there be before I do something like this? Just curious in your process.
Yeah, that's a good question. I gave a quick hint at that, but let me give you more context. So when I'd come directly out of Amazon, and I had heard people talk about the values, the leadership principles. I just never been part of a company where people use them for everything. They were in how we recruited. They were in our performance reviews. We talked about them when we talked about, products we built. Like we really thought about them all the time. So I remember thinking, I like this. Like we should be deliberate. So what I did is when I first started Convoy, the first 5 engineers that joined us, I think 3 of them were from Amazon. My co-founder had joined my team at Amazon as well before. So we all went to Leavenworth for a weekend, actually. I remember we went up there. It's like the first thing we did as a group. Let's just get out of town and go talk about what we're going to go try to build. And we spent half the time talking about the company, like the product, but we all spent half the time talking about culture. And we started writing down, we're like, hey, we're all going to start a company together. Like, what do we want to do? What do we want this to be? What would make us excited to work here? So we started writing those things down. And it was all over the place. And we actually stopped, to your point. I remember we're like, look, we're just like throwing out stuff. Why don't we just do this for a minute and see what happens? And so that's where I went out and I got that advice from Biz around that time. And so we just did it. We waited like 6 to 9 months, I remember. And then the process was a small group of us kind of started. I wrote the first draft, and then I iterated on it with a handful of people that really I wanted to have ownership over this. We got it pretty close, but obviously you can debate these things forever. And I remember we went to, I think it was Bell Thai, which is a Thai restaurant in Belltown. Our office is down the street, and we said, we're not leaving here until this is done. So we just sat down and we finalized our list of company values. And we went back to the company. It was only probably, I don't know, maybe 20 people at that point. And every week we had an all hands. So at the next all hands, we said, we're going to dedicate this all hands to talking about these values. And we walked through them all. And then from then on, for every employee that joined, I walked through the values for an hour. And I didn't do it one-on-one all the time. We ended up doing calls for everybody who joined the last month. I would do like a monthly call, but I would basically tell the story and history for every value and why we have them and what we expect you to do with them, so people understood. Again, back to the know why concept, let's just live it. And then we ended up doing that. And I think, I'd say maybe there were, like, we had a lot, and there was a reason for it. One reason is, like, some people say, let's raise the bar in our company when we hire. What does that even mean? What does it mean to raise the bar? So I remember saying, well, one way we're going to define raise the bar is, if we're hiring somebody, they don't need to be exceptional at every value, but they need to be exceptional at least one. We need to be able to say they really raise the bar here. In addition to their day job, they need to raise the bar in terms of how they operate, like as a person. And so that was one thing we used it for as well. I think someone walking up with the mic. There's 2 questions, or 2 hands.
A couple of examples you gave are actually, to me, are contradictory, so I wanted to have you clarify. One is make sure that everybody on your team can feel like they are the owner, they can operate, they're part of the problem. But you gave an example where they were just debating over stars versus buttons, right, which is like 20% of my engineering calls. And then you had to make a call. You're like, nope, just do that. So there's like a little bit in between, right? Because sometimes you have to say, nope, just follow this. But how do you convince them that that was like almost their idea? Or how do you implement both of these together?
So in this system, there were many other areas of tension where maybe one would drive one behavior and one circumstance another. So it wasn't perfect. In that case, again, I think the principle was we need to really own the problem. So I didn't actually go to them and say, just change it. I went to them and said, okay, let's talk about why we're doing like this. Let's actually go to the first principle of this debate here. Why do we care so much? Like, what is the reason to look at this? And we went through the reasons, it came out that people didn't like copying. They didn't want to copy the existing thing because as a designer, it's like, it looks like failure when you just copy somebody. So we actually, that value was created out of that discussion, actually. It didn't exist before it. And so we discussed and remember we actually tried to figure out what was going on. Like, why is this such a big deal? And so we said, let's create this innovate deliberately concept, which kind of meant free yourself from worrying about this. Like, at least from a top-down perspective, it is okay to copy, and you're not gonna, no one's gonna look down on your design creativity because you copied here. And it sort of was, it was interesting because I hadn't, I'd worked with a designer, but I realized that was part of it. It was literally just this design desire to not copy somebody else. And so I created a principle around, let's just copy when we don't need to be innovative because we can go way faster then. And we explained it. Now, you could debate it, but there was rationale. They knew why the decision was being made, and it was informing the culture we were building. And so I think it was like fine in that case to kind of like institute, to drive that. There's always gonna be some top-down decision making you have to do, and you have to like guide people, but you wanna create general principles so when you're not in the room, a big part of having leadership principles is like the leader is not always gonna be there, or like the company's gonna get bigger. How do you feel small as you get bigger, Well, if you can have a set of guidelines, you can make decisions more independently and faster.
You've talked a lot about expectations. Could you give some examples of expectations you would set both on yourself and of new employees when you're joining?
Got it. That kind of like what I would say I expect from you and you expect from me. Yeah. I think it's things like, it's everything from like hard work, like basic things. Like just saying that. Like I'm going to be here and I'm going to be available for you. Like if you need me, here's my cell phone number. You can text me, you can call me. If you have a challenge, if you're facing some issue here or this thing here, like it's okay to ask for this. Because a lot of times when people come into a new culture, a new startup, they're not quite sure what's like culturally okay to ask for or what's normal, and they don't want to bring things up because they're worried they're going to feel like they're going to feel out of place, or they're going to like, I don't know, maybe you're going to think less of them because they have some issue or they bring something up. So a lot of it was around just identifying the things that people usually came in with insecurities around, or weren't quite sure what it would mean to be in a new company that you discover in the first 6 months of being at a startup or a company, and just being upfront with as many of those as we could, and kind of saying, I'm going to do all these things and I expect you to do a lot of these things too. And as an example, like I joined a big company recently, and I think what happens in a bigger company is like everyone just kind of assumes everyone knows these things because they've been there for a long time. And so there isn't any like, it's like comes slowly, but you're trying to like often figure it out as well. And I just like the idea in a startup of speed. Like we don't have a ton of time. Let's just be really upfront about all these things you're going to be thinking about. And that was the general gist of it. It wasn't like it wasn't like take this metric from X to Y. It was more like how we're going to behave. All right. I think we are out of time. All right. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thanks.